All right, welcome to the next class here in the 67-day program about money, finances. Remember the fundamental principle here: you'll never have anything you don't understand, not at the high levels that you want if you want to live a good life. So as we go through this, we're touching on all those elements that I see people do wrong, I've done wrong, and of course what people do right, because what you don't want to be is Mr. Mike Tyson, who made 400 mil, he says in his autobiography about 600 million, and then was down to zero. He never understood money. He understood boxing, he didn't understand money, and so then you make money and you end up with zero. I had a friend like that here in LA who made an app. He understood apps technology, made a business before he was 30 years old, sold it for like $18 million. Now he has zero. You know why? He didn't understand money. So the immutable law of the universe, of the financial universe, is that money follows knowledge. He didn't have knowledge, money didn't follow him. He invested, some guys were like, hey, there's this real estate deal out in the desert in California. He didn't understand economics, supply and demand. He didn't understand the nitty gritty of deals and real estate and diversification, and he lost it all. And so one of the things that you don't want to do is make money and then lose it. It's better to have never made it at all than to know what it's like and lose it. And so one of those questions that is universally necessary for you to be able to answer well, and not just, you see little articles on this subject. Should I rent a house or buy a house? It's a little bit similar to cars. They don't call it usually renting, they call it leasing. Should you buy or lease? I want to talk specifically about one of the largest expenses you will ever have in your life. And if you want to have mastery of money, you must understand this question of where you live, whether it's in your parents' house or when I was sleeping on a couch in a mobile home. This principle applied. I didn't know it yet. Whether you're living in an apartment, that's where I went to. No, I went from sleeping on a couch in a mobile home to I got a little place with two other roommates. It was interesting. We all had the same birthday. It's pretty crazy. Literally all within like 8 hours born. We didn't know each other. I found them on, Craigslist or something. So that was my next place to live. And then I went from there to having my own apartment with a roommate. And then, as you make more money, own multiple properties, multiple houses, different parts of the world. Now I've got places in Hollywood Hills and Sunset Strip and San Diego and the East Coast, and looking at London and New York. And so the question never ends of what do you do about real estate and location? Because I'm not a real estate investor per se. It's not my primary focus. I stick to those things I know and I enjoy. Real estate's, to me, not something I absolutely love, and therefore I haven't made it my primary business. But make no mistake, all humans need shelter. And so if you don't get this question down of renting versus buying, you're going to be like millions of people in 2008 who should have been renting when they were buying up all these homes. And lo and behold, the recession came, the biggest recession besides the Great Depression in the 1920s and 30s, came and swept them up. And maybe that happened to you or your family or someone you knew, and it comes from a fundamental misunderstanding of renting versus owning where you live. I read a book by Tom Brown. He's this famous survival guy. People get lost in the woods in a national park. The Coast Guard will fly him in, and he tracks them down and finds people. And he says in one of his books on survival, he says, people get it wrong. If you're ever lost on a desert island or lost in the middle of jungle or forest, first thing to seek is not water. He said you can go about 3-4 days without water. It's not food. You can go a month without food. He says it's shelter. Shelter is what kills almost all people who are lost. And so in the same way, if you go through the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if you've ever seen that psychological one, it talks about all the things we need. Shelter is at the top. So when we talk about money, most people spend the majority of their paycheck, or the largest chunk of their paycheck, on housing. Whether you're completely broke right now or a multimillionaire, people still do the same thing. One of my business partners, he has a 40,000 square foot house. Okay? He spent a significant amount of the money he's made on housing. So the question then becomes ownership. And the two primary forms of residency, location, shelter you can have is either renting a place or buying a place. About that simple. There's obviously some things in between and lease options and all this, and this isn't a real estate course. This is to give you a fundamental and strong understanding of all the major elements of your financial future. Renting versus buy. First of all, let me tell you what you don't want to believe, okay? What I've been misled and had to learn the hard way was not accurate. What's not accurate is any person on planet Earth who breaks Charlie Munger's rule. Charlie Munger, the billionaire, says, avoid extreme ideologies. So if you meet somebody that says, whatever you do, you should always be buying real estate, real estate's the greatest investment, they are incorrect. I can prove that statistically. You can prove it. Look at the Forbes list. Richest people in the world didn't get there through real estate. Some people have. They neglect to look at all the people who went broke on real estate. Real estate isn't magical, and therefore buying it is not always in your best interest. Now, you're going to meet, there's a new school of thought kind of emerging out there based on valuations and based on 2008 after that crash, saying you should always rent a place that is cheaper to rent. Once again, avoid extreme ideologies. If you've been through the 67 steps mentor, 67-day mentor program, you know what I hate, which is people who use the black and white mindset. Life is not black and white, most things. There's a few things, you know, certain crimes are black and white. You shouldn't do them. You know, it's cut and dry, don't do them. But most of life is about nuance. It's about the situation. So when it comes to real estate, there is a time where you should rent. There are areas of this planet Earth where you should rent. And there's areas that you should look to buy. Now, how do you identify what those are? Remember what Aristotle said. It's easy to be angry, but to be angry at the right person at the right time for the right reason with the right intensity, that's difficult. What he was saying is it's easy to say always buy. What's harder and what takes a more sophisticated mind is knowing when should you buy, when should you not buy, how much money should you put down, how much money should you borrow, and so on and so forth. So we're not going to answer every real estate question here. That's not the point of this lesson. But what I do want to give you is such a powerful tool that almost nobody has out on planet Earth. I don't know why, except to say most people have been tricked into thinking about things black and white. So they get some mentor, some advisor, they read some magazine article that's like home buying. I was actually watching The Office, if you've seen that show with Dwight Schrute. There's a season 6 where or season 7, one of the episodes where he hears that you should buy real estate. So he buys the building they're in, if you've seen that comedy. Don't listen to those articles. Definitely don't get your business and money advice from Dwight Schrute, fictional character. But here's kind of the mentality that's going to get you the most accurate answer. Because I don't know where you live, okay? I don't know how much money's in your bank account. But I do know this universal principle that applies. You should buy. Now, this is assuming you have some money saved up, okay? Depending on where you live in the world and country, sometimes you can get government loans or, government-backed loans that are a little bit cheaper. If you're a veteran, you can get loans. Generally, you buy, especially your first property, you're going to buy with some bank assistance, okay? But you need to usually have some money to put down. They call it, money down. It's like a deposit, okay? That ensures the bank knows that if they give you this house and loan you, let's say it's $300,000 house, they give you $300,000, they want you to put some money down so they know you have skin in the game. So the first question is, the first answer is, if you have absolutely $0 in your bank account, you don't want to buy. Because you generally will not be able to buy unless you fit in a category that's, like a veteran or something like that. Once in a while, you can get 0 interest loans. Certain parts of the world maybe, but for the most part, or a parent's going to co-sign or a friend or something. But assuming you're not one of those special exceptions, If you have $0 in your bank account, just rent. It's not as bad as people think, okay? Number two, assuming you have more than $0, you have something that you could put aside, and so you're a genuine conflict. The bank would loan you money, you put your deposit down, boom. Or you could just keep your money and do something else with it and rent. So here's the answer. I'm a little sick here. My voice is going in and out. So it's a good thing this is a virtual conversation. Can't get you sick. The next question is, assuming you have money, opportunity cost. This is the most important concept when it comes to buying. So let me give you a real life example. Jeff Bezos, when he started Amazon.com, before he was a billionaire, he was faced with a conflict. If he quit his job, if he started Amazon, he had $70,000. Now let's imagine two scenarios. Let's imagine Jeff Bezos had read an article that said, always buy. So he has enough money. He didn't have zero, okay? You don't want to have zero, then you can't usually buy. He had $70,000 that he could invest in something. So let's imagine an alternate universe where Jeff Bezos had invested 70 grand in a home. How much money would Jeff Bezos have right now? Well, he wouldn't have had the money to start Amazon. Somebody else would probably done it. He missed the opportunity. He'd have a nice house. Maybe he'd paid it off 20 years later. So he'd have a house, let's say, worth $500,000 or $1 million. So that 70 grand that he had to put down for the bank loan would have, let's say, now made him $500,000 or even $1 million or even $5 million. Well, he had a better opportunity. That was to take 70 grand and invest it in a business. And he did that, and he started Amazon and made, I think he's worth $42 billion. So in hindsight's always 20/20, it would have been a horrible investment for him to take 70 grand and buy, because the opportunity costs of other things he could do were way better. So whenever you're presented with buying anything versus renting or leasing it, you got to ask yourself, if I buy it and I have to put a lot of money down, what else could I do with that money? If you have nothing else to do with the money, nothing else to do with that deposit, if you're not Jeff Bezos, you don't have a business idea, you don't have another investment to do, there's no better use for that money. You're just going to take it and put it in a savings account at 1%. Well, that tips the favor. Maybe then you should be buying. But if you could take that 70 grand, let's say you're an entrepreneur, and every time you spend $70,000 on advertising and marketing, you make back, $150,000. Well, then that's a great return on your investment, and a home probably is not going to make you that much. So in that case, it'd be better to rent. Okay, that's principle number one. And you're going to see that. Now, some of you, that's principle number one. Some of you might think that's too simplistic. Some people hear opportunity cost. Oh, I already know about that. Well, let me just share with you what Charlie Munger says. Everybody thinks they know opportunity cost. Nobody lives it right. Okay, it's not what you know up here. It's what you do in actuality with your money. To think with opportunity cost is a much higher level and sophisticated level versus black and white, always buy, always rent. The number two thing that you must factor in that's absolutely vital is you got to ask yourself, okay, what's the true value of what I'm buying? So you got to adopt what's called a value investor mentality. Sorry, that's a U. Value. Here's what that means. It means, let's say you got some money saved up. Let's say you're like Jeff Bezos. You save up 70 grand. You're like, opportunity cost, I don't have anything good to do with that money. I'm going to buy a house. Ty, is that the best thing to do? Once again, let's say you're going to put down 70 grand and the bank's going to loan you $230,000. So you could buy a $300,000 house. That's your opportunity. You pass the first test. It's a better opportunity cost for me to take the 70 grand, put that down as a deposit, it's not really a deposit, I should say it's collateral, so to speak. Put that down towards the house. Well, then the next question is the house really worth 300 grand? And people get this wrong. Houses aren't magical. If you pay $1 million for a house that's only worth $100,000, you got ripped off. If you have the opportunity to buy a house that's worth $1 million and you're only paying $100,000, you have the deal of a lifetime and definitely do it. You're going to 10x your money. So you must understand value. Now, the hard question people always ask is, how do you know what the true value of whatever you're buying is? I'm going to give you, this is a tough question. People get PhDs in this question. Warren Buffett learned under Benjamin Graham at Wharton, and Columbia teaches this, Harvard, Stanford, how to calculate the true, they call it the intrinsic value. You'll want to pay, ideally, less. So if it's a $300,000 house that you only have to pay $300,000, but it's really worth $500,000, that means on day one, you made a profit. So the way to think of value with homes is go, what would it rent for? And this is not understanding this principle number 3 is without a doubt a great part of why 2008 housing crisis came about. People didn't get it. They were buying houses for $2 million that they could have rented for $4,000 a month, $3,000. So, excuse me, the true value is what would it rent for? And the reason I say rent is because the real way in the stock market, you'd say, what's the earnings potential, so to speak? With houses, the only way, if you own a house, the only way you're ever going to make money besides selling it is to rent it out to other people. So let's say, going back to our analogy, there's a $300,000 house. You have 70 grand saved up to put down or from another house you owned, and you're trying to decide whether to get the $300,000 house. You don't have any better opportunities. You ask yourself, what's the value? Then you go, I don't know. Nobody knows the value. It's a big question mark. So then you go, what would that $300,000 house rent for? If the answer is, for example, the house is in a great area, it's in Beverly Hills, or it's in Chevy Chase, Maryland, or in Miami, or Miami Beach, and let's say that $300,000, one of my mentors, this is not the greatest rule of thumb, but it's one, it doesn't always apply, but many years ago, he used to say, look, the value of a house is 10 times what it rents for. So for example, if a house rents for, and this is again, there's a lot, sometimes this is true, sometimes it isn't. London right now, this doesn't apply. A lot of the United States, it's relatively accurate. So if a home is renting for $2,000 a month, okay, how much is that a year in rent income? $24,000. So if you, remember, you got to pretend you're the owner of it before you own it. So you go, if I own that house and I turned around and immediately rented it out for $2,000 a month, that's $24,000 a year. What's 10 times that? $240,000. So you'd say the value of that house based on the rental income is $240,000. So if it's on sale, remember, and you want to know it's not an exact number, it gives you a ballpark. So if that house is for sale for $600,000 and you're like, wow, give or take $50,000, this house is only worth $200,000 to $300,000. I'm not buying it for $600,000 because it'll take me years for appreciation and inflation to catch up and me to have a profit. So the way to think about it is, this is a general framework, 10x, okay? Depending on how you, like I said, in London right now, which may be a sign that London's in a huge bubble. There's a lot of people thinking London's in a bubble because right now there's places you can rent that are only renting for, a teeny multiple, meaning you can get a $10 million home and you only pay $10,000 a month. So that means if you're paying $10,000 a month, that's $120,000 a year times 10. That means the house is only worth $1.2 million, and right now those houses are selling for $10 million. So that means they're at 100 times rent, which means which I'll just tell you this, I can't guarantee you, no one, it might be a great investment in London, I don't put my money in that, okay? Some people do, they're risk takers, I don't. But I'll tell you, if I see a piece of property and it's selling for $250,000 and I could rent it for $2,000 a month, or I could maybe fix it up a little bit and rent it out for that much, I might be interested in that property. Now again, this 10X rule, it's a little bit outdated for complicated reasons I won't bring up in this call. This is more of, in this talk, there's things changing because of appreciation. People are, it's called pricing in future value. So this is not perfect. But this gets you on planet Earth. And it's going to keep you from making horrible investments. And when it comes to buying real estate, there's a lot. I've bought some real estate that I understood, this thing ain't going to make me a millionaire, but it's a solid, decent investment. And when I follow this general principle, give or take, so for example, if I can rent, I got a place right now in La Jolla, California. I think I can rent it for $1,500. I can rent it for about $20,000 a year, okay? And I forget what we paid. So that's 10X would be $200,000. And we paid about $300,000. So I paid maybe 15X. Still, it's not horrible. It's not horrible. It's not like a lot of people did, where they did stuff where they could only rent it for $1,500 a month and it cost $1 million. That's a freaking nightmare. That's when remember, $1,500 roughly times 12, $15,000, $20,000 a year. They paid multiples that are, oh, sorry, did I do this math right? I said, yeah, I did my math right. But they paid multiples that are just make no sense. So many people are out there, and your friends are doing that. They're buying pieces of real estate that they can rent for $1,000 a month. Okay, that's $12,000 a year, and they're paying $300,000 for that. You gotta think hard when it's 20 or 30 times what you can rent it for. That's the best is low, because the best is like you can buy a place for $100,000 a house. There's places like that in the Midwest in the U.S. I have a friend doing that, buying kind of old little places, putting a little money into them. He buys them for $70,000, puts $30,000 in, so it's a $100,000 little piece of real estate, and he can rent them, for $1,500, $1,000 a month. So the multiple is like 8 times, which means mathematically he could pay off the home by renting it out for 8 years. Doesn't exactly come out that way, but roughly. So this means it'll take me 10 years to pay it off. Some people are buying stuff that take them 30, 40 years to pay off. One of a guy that I met at Joel Salatin, who's a CEO named Kyle, he's a top CEO in Virginia, and Joel Salatin's one of his best friends. He said, Ty, anything that you could put money into and make your money back in under 3 years, you're crazy not to do. This was his advice. Anything that's going to take you 3 to kind of 7 years, you should think hard about. And anything that's going to take you, 10, 20, 30 years, you might not want to do to pay off. So again, what's the value? Look at what you could rent it for. Now, if you don't know, okay, what to rent, what rents are, go online, go on Craigslist, look for similar houses. There's a great website called Zillow.com. You go there, it'll show you what they call the comparables. Comparable pieces of property, similar and close by what you're looking to buy. And it'll tell you sometimes the rents too, because a lot of times these websites are starting to list rentals. So the rule is when the value is way lower than what you have to pay, you don't want to buy, you want to rent. I saw that in Hollywood. In Hollywood, you could get great places for a pittance in rent, but to buy them was outrageous. Now, to be fair to those of you who love buying, there's some advantages of buying, there's some tax advantages, depending on the country you live in terms of the interest is tax deductible in most countries or in many countries. There's advantage of forced savings. So that's why I say, if you got the money and you have no other opportunity and it's relatively decent, like that place in La Jolla, you could tip the scales more towards buying. Then you could just look at some ancillary things like, do I like it? Do I feel like managing the property? Is it a place I want to live if you want to live there? But if it's way out of whack, that's why I'm not buying in London now. It's too out of whack. The rent, they're doing what Warren Buffett calls the greater sucker theory. People are buying, spending 50 million bucks on places. It's literally, there's a $100 million place in London. I forget what it's called, One Hyde. It's just a condo for $100 million. I mean, that's nuts. It's not like it's acreage. And I think it's indicative of a bubble. It might not be a bubble because London is a very unique place, but boy, I would be highly surprised if there wasn't a huge fluctuation in that, because there's a lot of overseas money, a lot of oil money coming in and boosting and jacking the prices to beyond the true intrinsic value of those places. Remember, the intrinsic value of real estate is what people can use it for to live there and what they'll pay you for it. So even if you want to live in it, you got to compare it to what if I just rented it. And I've been in situations where I thought I was going to buy the place, and then I did the math, and I'm like, I'll just rent it. And then I'll buy real estate. If your goal is to make money and you want the tax deduction and you want the loans, you can buy real estate in other areas that you don't want to live in. So if your goal is to be a real estate investor, you can buy anywhere in the world now. You can even buy through the stock market, through what they call real estate investment trusts, REITs. But we're talking about a place to live, whether you should rent or buy. And by the way, this applies to cars, whether you should lease versus buy. Although cars is, I'll do a different talk on that. There's enough differences but the general thing is value and opportunity cost of the cash you have to put down to buy. Buying almost always means you're on the hook for more money up front. It also means one other thing, calculating the buying, the upkeep. You got to keep it up. When things break, there's no warranty on homes for the most part, unless it's brand new. You got to fix it. With renting, you're putting and switching the burden onto the landowner or the landlord. So when in doubt, rent until you're sure. Joel Salatin used to tell me when you first move onto a farm, raw land, before you build a barn, spend 1 year living there. Find out where the river overflows so you don't go, oh wow, after 4 cycles of winter, spring, summer, fall, I found out, thank God I didn't put my piece of real estate, my barn there. It would have been horrible. In the same way, when you move into a new town, you're like, should I rent or buy? Rent for a while. Test on somebody. Don't lock yourself in. Buying, especially if you get a loan, is a long-term lock-in. And once you're locked in, if nobody wants to buy it back from you, you're stuck with it. That's called what I said Buffett calls the greater sucker theory. That's what I think is happening in London. People are buying going, well, if I change my mind, I can always find somebody even crazier to pay me even more than my crazy price I paid for. And it's a dangerous game, because then when a recession comes in, when bad news comes in, all of a sudden there's no buyers and you still are stuck having to pay that every month. With rent, you might have a 1 or 2 year rent lease, but you're not in a residential going to have a 30-year one like you would on a house. So, question for you. Do the math on where you live currently. Okay? So, question number 1. What is the current rent on the house that you're in? Maybe you're renting. Or if you live in your own house, what could you rent it out for? Okay? Number 2. Based on that number, if you figure it's $1,500 a month or $2,000 a month, what's the 10x value of that house? What's the 15x value? Get those 2 numbers. So if you're paying $1,000 a month for rent, or you live in a place that you own and you could rent it to someone else for $1,000, that's $12,000 a year. What's 10x that? $120,000. What's 15x that? About $200,000, right? 180, 200. So now you know the true intrinsic value, okay? So those are the 2 questions. Number 3, where is an example where you have a pre-existing extreme opinion about this that you realize now was just because you read an article or an uncle gave you their opinion, but that might not be backed up by actual statistics and math. So the 3rd question, where'd you get the current opinion you had before watching this, and how after watching this, have you gotten some new insight? Hopefully you've gotten some, okay? So thanks, answer those 3 questions, and I will see you on the next here in the 67-day program.